Okay, can everyone hear me? Yeah. We're debating, little inner debate over here in the inner circles. It's better with the microphone or without the microphone? Without? I heard you the first time, I know. That's good? Good? To me, it was a debate. I make a debate out of everything. If you want to debate about if it was a debate, you can do that too. Okay. First of all, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. It is a great honor to have my parents visiting, and no such thing as you'll get to know them soon tonight. And I think my mother could attest to this. There's no such thing as my father truly taking vacation. He retired, but he's working in Israel, and he's visiting us in Montreal, but we booked him in for a lecture. So there's really no such thing as taking a break. And as you'll see very clearly, that my father is someone who never worked for a living. He did his passion and he got paid for it. And to me, that was a huge lesson in life. Just seeing my father day in and day out, going to work, but it was never work. It was just doing what he loved. And seeing that as a example and a mentorship in life was just an incredible thing. I've had people since I moved to Montreal, on less than 3 months ago. I bumped into, I would say countless, but more accurately, several to a dozen people who knows my father, who know my father from in a professional context. When my parents actually lived in Montreal, how many years ago?
I can't count that far.
Huh?
1980.
1980. Few years before I was born. And people, I guess, through struggles and medical reasons, came to see my father, who was, we're talking when he was practicing in Ottawa, and above anything else, you look at his bio online, you'll see he's a recognized leader in his field and dedicated his life to this specific passion, which we'll hear about. But above anything else, anyone who experienced my father's care will tell you that it was his empathy and his listening that is remembered amongst anything else. And it's really because that it was always his passion and not just something that he did as a profession or as a work. One of my strong childhood memories is, I think it was every 2 years or so, my father and his colleagues at the Ottawa Fertility Clinic would hire or rent like a public park, a city park, and invite all his ex-patients for lunch. And it was like my dad and his 5 or 6 colleagues, and literally hundreds of children running around the park. We're talking 2-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds. It's like, wow, that's pretty good, Dad. Not bad. I knew I couldn't top that, so I just became a rabbi instead. But I feel like at this point we have to share a story just that pertinent to my father, never retiring and realizing the value of what he was doing in the world. I think that we have to share a story that happened with our family not far from here with the late Tusher Rabbi. Dad, you want to share it?
You sure you want me to tell that story?
Yeah, it's a good story.
The Tusher Rebbe Shalom, he used to, before Hanana Holzer, my good friend who's now back in Israel, came to Montreal. Some of you knew Hanana when he was here at the Royal Vic. The Tusher Rebbe used to send us Hasidim from Tush, some of the other Hasidic groups. They slept all the way to Ottawa to see us there for in vitro fertilization treatment. And one of the patients kept bugging us to come for Shabbos to Tush. A bit foreign idea, but we came for Shabbos Hanukkah, and they arranged for me to have like a personal bracha from the Rebbe. And my father also was an OBGYN doctor, who was quite now known in Canada, in Vancouver, where I grew up. And my father, Al-Masham, was 50 years old when he died of metastatic cancer. I was in my late teens. And the Tusher Rebbe asked me, what bracha I would like. Was there anything I was worried about? And I mentioned to him, I was a bit worried about some in the audience might know, I call it a famous Rashi, when Yitzchak Avinu was about to be faked out by Yaakov, stealing the brachas from Esau, and he was going blind in his old age. And he said to his son Asa, who his intention was to give the bracha to originally, Eni yodea yomosi, I don't know when I'm going to die. And Rashi says, and he proves it, I won't go through the proofs, that 5 years either side of a parent's death, you should be concerned and be very worried about yourself being in danger. And at that point, I think I was 48 or 49 years old going, this Rashi, I said to the Rabbi, you know, this Rashi, I have to be very careful. Is there anything that you would recommend? He said, Dr. Claman, the work that you do is going to protect you from, you know, having a premature. So I turned to Jenny, my wife, I said, I guess I can't really retire. That's the story that Zolly wanted to share with you.
Excellent. And that is, you'll again allow you to do your own research. My father has published countless of academic, professional articles and several co-published several halachic articles as well in Asia and other medical journals that are published in Hebrew. So that brings us to the topic at hand and the background of what we're going to talk about tonight through through a halachic lens and ethical lens is something that happened just 2 weeks ago, but obviously was taking place for the past year almost. In Rishon LeZion's Asuta Medical Center in Israel that has an IVF clinic. Just a couple weeks ago, a little baby girl was born. The reason why it's more complicated is about 2 months into the pregnancy that this couple was carrying through in vitro fertilization treatment, IVF treatment. They underwent DNA testing and found out through this that they are not genetically related to their child, but rather the wrong embryo in the clinic from a different couple who was also going through IVF treatment was implanted in this birth couple, the couple that gave birth to the child. So before we get into the several halachic implications of such a case and how to view them, how to relate to them, I thought I would call, I thought maybe Dad, you could come up and explain, I guess, 3 questions. Number one, just a basic background of the technology that you spent, and you still spend your career at the forefront of technology of IVF. And number 2 is how could this happen? You would think you would think that there's so many measures in place to ensure that this doesn't happen. So how could such a thing happen? And third, you live in Israel, so how are the Israeli media covering this story about the error, and what are your thoughts about that?
I don't want to sound at all pedantic because I suspect a lot of people here know a little about in vitro fertilization, but in case people don't, just review very briefly. In order to have a baby, a woman has to release an egg, and the sperm has to travel through the woman's uterus and out the tube, meet the egg, fertilize it, and that fertilized egg is now called an embryo. We're talking about a structure less than 1/10 of a millimeter in diameter at that stage. And that fertilized egg or embryo now travels out the tube into the uterus and has a chance to implant. That's normal fertilization. So classically, in Ontario, until very recently, the only reason for infertility that the government would cover anything is if the tubes are blocked, so the egg and sperm can't meet. So simply, we give hormones so that instead of just one egg, that's usually what develops during the menstrual cycle, we'll stimulate 8, 10, 12 eggs. And we nowadays can actually harvest those, guiding a needle through the pelvis by ultrasound, takes 5 minutes. And then put the sperm in the egg. It can't be in the tube since that's blocked. In the lab, we put them together and wait a few days, 3, 4, 5 days. And then the resultant fertilized egg is put into the uterus through the vagina. It's a simple procedure, really. And any extra ones can be frozen. Nowadays, we have technology where even if there's a profound sperm problem, we can inject the sperm into the egg and fertilize almost in any case. It's very rare in young people nowadays to help them have babies when otherwise they would never ever been able to. And that's a technology. Now, obviously, once you remove the egg from the woman's body and the man hands his sperm to the lab, there's all kinds of potential, God forbid, errors where the sperm is misidentified, the egg is misidentified. In this case, I guess a fertilized egg or embryo is misidentified and put into the wrong person. I was a bit, no one knows what's happening yet in this case in Israel, but I read in the Israeli press, the Asuta hospital told a reporter that it seems that the error occurred because of one lab worker. And to me, I was shocked to read that. I don't know how accurate it was, but you don't ever have one lab worker identify a sperm or an egg or an embryo before moving it around. You have, in our labs, I think it's standard of practice in most places, you have to have 2 lab workers sign off that this is the identity of the man, and that's his sperm, and that's it. And you move the embryo, they come out, they identify this as a patient, who's wearing an armband, it's his shoe, and so on. So if it's only one worker, that sounds like that may have been a problem. So that's also one of the ways that you have checks and balances. You have at least 2 people in the lab check everything before they're moved on. Our lab in Ottawa years ago looked into like a Q code. Is that what they're called? You know, those barcodes that you put on everything. It increased the safety of the whole thing, but the barcode system was very expensive. And although our lab director wanted us to buy it, we elected not to. I don't think very many labs use it because it's expensive. But if you use a double identification system, the chances of, God forbid, a big error are very low. And of course, Rabbi Weiss, here in Ottawa, in Montreal, your chief rabbi, because we had a lot of Hasidic people coming to Ottawa, we arranged to have his hashgacha. We have the MK in our IVF program. And it's still, as far as I know, running because a colleague of mine, Doron Schmorgan, took over. And we trained a bunch of local women in the community to come in and be mashkifot that would come anytime someone wanted to have what our lab called kosher IVF to triple check. So they'd have the lab people, they would be there. And for the kosher IVF program, we would have a separate incubator, separate tank for freezing them, identified when the mashkif was there only. And these are just sort of some of the issues here. It seems that the checks and balances not being good. And it's very frightening to the public because Rabbi Claman mentioned that they had a genetic test while pregnant that determined that the baby being carried is not her baby. Well, that genetic test that she did is not a standard test. It just happened to be she was having a genetic test to identify something else, and they discovered that it's not her child. So of course it frightens everybody. We're going to these labs because who knows, God forbid, how many children are out there that are not the children of the parents. And it's not because of an evil intent like a Jewish doctor in Ottawa had done. If you remember stories in the national press about Dr. Norman, but just out of a simple error, and maybe because of standard code. I know that we started to have Rabbi in Israel, Ministry of Health, are investigating all private IVF units in Israel to try to find out whether practice standards should be set in a way different than they are. Brief, that's basically it. If anyone wants to ask a question about that, be happy to field it. Otherwise, I'm going to put Zolly up here now. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I might come back and reference this again. When my father and I were planning this talk in the past few weeks, and he just mentioned that mistakes happen and everyone's kind of uneasy about the factor of human error, but also through the technology of IVF, just some wacky, for lack of a better term, cases come about. My father sent me this article, I call it an appendix, anyone's happy to take it home, I can send it to you by email, where think about the relationship you have with your mother-in-law when you read this title, this headline. A grandmother, 56, gives birth to her son and daughter-in-law's baby. Right? She gave birth to her own grandson. She was a surrogate for her son and daughter-in-law. Right? So you think of, obviously, not obviously, but this case was not to do with Jewish people. But you consider like the halachic ramification in all these cases, which are not natural and could create a lot of very interesting discussion about the halachic and ethical ramifications of these cases. But tonight we're talking about what happened in Israel and the halachic and ethical ramifications that come up from that. But I just want to start the conversation with two disclaimers that even before I highlight what the issues are that we'll try to tackle. And the first disclaimer is that this case is, to a great degree, a human tragedy. I mean, this is a sad case, and we're going to be talking about it on an academic level. But we don't mean to dehumanize the suffering and pain that is present in these two families, and ultimately this little Jewish girl who is going to be growing up with somewhat of a spotlight on her, and as we'll see, potentially somewhat of a modern day case of Mishpat Shlomo, where King Solomon was faced with two mothers claiming this little baby, both of them claiming that this little baby was theirs. So we have a potential custody battle. If in due time the biological parents are identified and they want to raise this child, so they could approach the courts in Israel and say, hey, we want to raise this child. And obviously the birth parents, they've already expressed this publicly, that they already hired lawyers and fully intend to raise this child as their own. So as they say in the Gemara, Heichi dayin ledina lahai dina. How does a judge, how does Bezdin, how do civil courts relate to such a thing? Genetically, the baby belongs to couple A, and I mean, a whole different couple was this unintentional surrogate. They wanted to have a child, going through IVF treatment, and they had a child, but it ended up being not a child of their own. So ultimately, the first disclaimer is that we have a tefillah, a prayer that this little baby should grow up in a loving home and have a successful and nourishing future ahead of her. We can all respond to that. Amen. Secondly, second disclaimer is that our goal tonight is not to come out with any halachic conclusions. So if you come home tonight and tell your spouse or your child or your parent or your neighbor, the rabbi said, that's the wrong outcome. These major big questions are reserved for the great halachic minds of our generation. There's really only a handful of them in every generation. And what we're going to try to do tonight, what I'll try to help you with, is to try to uncover and appreciate the complexity and understand the different perspectives. We could read in the papers, and you'll hear tonight that, Rabbi X says that the birth mother is the mother. Rabbi Lau published his Shuvah, was Chief Rabbi Lau of Israel, that the birth mother is the mother. You'll see tonight other rabbis, great halachic thinkers, saying, no, it's the genetic mother that's the mother. It's like you flip a coin, genetic, it's like, this or that. What I want to try to do tonight is try to understand where the struggle lies and wherein lies the sources that back up, one opinion and the other opinion, and just really try to appreciate the discussion more than anything. Which brings me to my next point. One of the most intriguing aspects of halacha, of the halachic methodology of how we come to halachic conclusions, specifically in contemporary halacha, is how seemingly arcane passages in the Gemara and the Talmud could be applied to modern day cases which you would never thought they could be applied to. And it comes with the understanding that every passage in the Gemara, every passage in the Talmud tells us something overtly at face value, but also underneath the surface is revealing a foundational point, a halachic concept, a premise, an axiom, which could then be applied to other cases, even if they're very different. But it reveals an underlying foundational concept in the law, in the halachic law. And of course, I know this is not a shocker, the Gemara does not talk about, Talmud does not talk about what happens to a case where the biological parents give birth to a child which are biologically not theirs, right? Shocker. Yes, the Gemara almost 2,000 years ago does not talk about such a thing. But somewhat magnificently, that foundational point of the question at hand, we find sources that do relate to such a thing. And the question at hand essentially is, what is the definitive quality of motherhood in Jewish law? Is it the birth mother, or is it the conception mother, or the owner, so to speak, of the egg? Right? We find this is going to get a little complicated, so we're going to try to use as clear as possible terminology. Right? So the biological, the birth mother, or the egg mother. Which one is the true definition of motherhood in Jewish law? So where could we look in Talmudic literature to find such an answer? And it's really an unbelievable thing. Like, it seems like we just throw in the white towel. Oh, like we gotta make it up. Like, just take a vote, and we'll go with the democratic way. What is more moral? What's more right? It seems like we're completely stuck. But us Jewish people, Torah Judaism, believe in the premise that's told to us in the 5th parak of Pirkei Avos. Ben Bagbag Omer, Ben Bagbag, the rabbi said, Hafachba v'hafachba dekulaba. You have to take the Torah, you have to look at it again and again, turn it around, Hafachba v'hafachba, learning again and again and again, understand it on a deeper level and a deeper level. Why dekulaba? Because all the answers of modern day challenges are found in the Torah. And the moment we have a challenge in the modern time that we say, oh, we don't know where to look, it's just because of our lack of being able to understand the Torah in its perfection. And the true greatness of the halachic minds in the past hundreds of years is not so much the way we think it is. It's not their it is their genius and their immense knowledge of the vast literature, but even more so, it's their ability to understand what's underneath the surface of every passage of the Talmud. Asking a great halachic authority, where do I even look for such a question? Like, forget coming to a halachic conclusion. Forget about that. Just knowing where to look, knowing which page in the Talmud and the Gemara to open up to find answers to these complex modern day questions, which don't really have a premise. They don't really have a something that we can fall back on. We don't. What bracha do I make on apples? Okay, so we know exactly where to look. There's a parak in brachas which tells us, on fruits you make this, on vegetables you make that. We know, and certain things which were unclear, the Gemara itself talks about. But like the case at hand, like it's all predicated on modern technology, and the genius of the halachic minds are really knowing which page in the Talmud and which page in the halachic literature to open up to even start the thinking process. That those same two great minds could come up with different conclusions. But knowing where to look, knowing the location, where to understand where the underlying halacha is being revealed, is really where the halachic authorities are show off, so to speak, or reveal their great genius. Fine. So I'm going to show you just in a moment where the halachic authorities point to in the Gemara to find the answer to the underlying question. But do keep in mind that the case at hand is very similar to two other cases which the halachic literature does speak about and relate to quite in a very developed way. And that is, number one, the case of surrogacy. A couple, for some reason, can't carry their own pregnancy, but they do have healthy ingredients. The egg and the sperm are healthy, but they can't carry the pregnancy. She's unable to carry the pregnancy for one reason or another. Speak to my father for more details. So they could say, we have a friend, we have a family member who is willing to carry the pregnancy for us. So you take the parents' wannabes, people who want to parent the child, take their egg and their sperm, and you through IVF, you fertilize the egg, turn it into an embryo, and then implant it into the surrogate mother. That's case number one. And again, there you have a splitting of the biological parents and the birth parents. And the reverse case would be a case of IVF treatment where the couple receives an egg donation from a third party. So there, it's the outside party that is the biological parents, but it's obviously the parents that want the child, that they are the birth parents. So how the halachic literature deals with quite profusely, and there's a lot of still think about this, how to define in both these cases, but with the inverse implications, right? Because if we commit ourselves, birth parent is the parent. So then in the case of surrogacy, so it's very interesting because she's the mother, and then we bring it back to the parents that want to raise a child. Halachically, the mother is not in the picture anymore because she's a surrogate, right? But if we stay committed to the birth mother as the mother, it turns out the exact opposite case in the egg donation. Okay, we get a donation from the outside, but the woman who gives birth to the baby is the baby. If we commit ourselves to the other opinion, that the biological or the egg mother is the true mother, so both those cases will come up with the opposite conclusion, right? The case that happened in Israel is essentially an unintentional surrogacy, where they thought they were having their own children, but unbeknownst to them, they gave birth to someone else's child. They were the surrogate to other people's eggs, right? So if we, again, commit ourselves to that birth mother is the mother, so then, okay, there's maybe an emotional healing to realize that it's not their biological child, but at least the mother of the couple who now has this little baby at their home somewhere in Rishon LeZion, probably, she knows that halachically, she's the mother. Who's the father? Definitely not her husband, right? Her father, the baby's father, halachically speaking, is definitely this other couple that the embryo, really the biological couple that the embryo belonged to. If we commit ourselves to the other side, and we'll see where this all comes from in a moment, that the biological mother is the mother. So then you have the couple right now who has this little baby, this 2-week-old baby, and Rishon LeZion, the halachic mother is somewhere else, and also the halachic father obviously is somewhere else. So this gets very complicated. Okay, so what are the halachic ramifications? Just to list the ones that I think are the easiest to talk about and the most relevant, going from the least intense to intense. First of all, in all these cases, surrogacy, egg donation, we all have an obligation to respect their mothers and fathers. Kibbud aveim, so important. God included it as one of the 10 commandments, right? Kibbud aveim. So is this baby, any baby in surrogacy, egg donation, are they chayav? Are they responsible to respect their mother? Which mother? Both their mothers? One of their mothers? I mean, this baby that's born, does he have to? Does he, when he or she grows up and realize, wait, my parents just told me that it was that I was born through a surrogate mother. Well, I have to seek that lady out, whoever she was, and respect them, and buy them dinner and treat them well and help them in their older years, because halachically I have a biblical obligation to respect my mother, right? So that would be true if the birth mother is the mother. But if the again, if we put ourselves to just the biological mother, the egg mother is the mother. So then in a case of an egg donation, the kid grows up and realizes that he or she was the product of a successful IVF cycle, but they needed an egg donation. Does this child need to learn who the egg came from and respect them, right? That would be one level, I guess you would call it the least intense of all questions that could come up. Another ramification is, let's say this little girl, just call her girl for now, in the case of surrogacy or in the case of egg donation, grows up and, I don't know, goes to summer camp or in high school or college, falls in love with a guy and they want to get married, right? So they call up the rabbi, does his due diligence. Somehow he reveals and uncovers that this little girl who fell in love with this boy was the product of an IVF cycle. And this little boy happens to be a crazy case, esoteric, fine, academic, fine. Let's talk about it. This boy happens to be the son of the surrogate mother who is long lost, right? So as rabbis, obviously, as Torah Jews, we cannot do a wedding between siblings, even though they haven't met each other their whole life. Halachically, that kedushin is not binding. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work under the chuppah. As they say in Yiddish, sugeinish. It just doesn't happen. Right? So is that a problem, or do we say no? The birth mother. So we say no. The biological mother is the mother, and the surrogate it's not a halachic sibling. That's okay. And obviously, the inverse case would be a problem if it was an egg donation. The egg donation. So you get the point, right? That's another way. How do we halachically define the product of a surrogacy or product of egg donation with regards to siblinghood? And being a sibling has halachic ramifications. Namely, are you allowed to get married or be in a relationship with them? That either works or doesn't work. Okay. And one step more intense would be, imagine a case, again, either surrogacy or egg donation, where you have two mothers involved, but only one of the mothers is Jewish. Right? So the baby gets carried in surrogacy in a non-Jewish woman, let's say, or the egg donation is coming from a non-Jewish source. Does the baby after birth need to go through conversion? Simple. This actually happens all the time. This comes up on a regular basis. do we say that the baby needs to go through the conversion? So if we commit ourselves to the birth mother is the mother and there's an egg donation, so no conversion needed. But if we say no, the biological mother is the mother and the egg, they have an egg donation to allow for fertility, the cycle of IVF. So even though the birth mother is Jewish, but the egg came from some egg bank and a donor, we don't know Jewish, not Jewish. Let's say we know that they're not Jewish. So then absolutely the child will need to go through conversion after birth, right? So that's a very practical case, which actually comes up quite often. We'll see the way we avoid even these questions, because this is going to end up, spoiler alert, a very gray area in halachic thought. So we avoid this by trying to make sure that the egg donation is as well coming from a Jewish source, right? Is that something in Israel? Fine. Lastly, which we touched on previously, is the issue of custody, right? Let's say both parents want to raise a child as their own. So how do we do this? And I think this is the one which is specifically unique in our case that we're talking about, the lab error in Israel. Okay, so with these questions in mind, let's take a little bit of a dive into the halachic sources to show you where this question comes up, emphasizing the genius of the halachic authorities to even open up to these pages. Okay, so the introduction to sources number 1 and 2, which you'll find on page 1 and 2 on the source sheets back to back. But the introduction is that there's a concept of ger shenifgar kekatan shenoled dami, literally translated that a convert is like a newborn baby. Meaning, a convert is not halachically related to the biological family. That's an axiom in halachic thought. Therefore, the halachic authorities realized that we could find a case which is spoken about in the Talmud 2,000 years ago. Spoken about a case where we have the splitting of hairs that we're looking for. Where we have, on one hand, the biological conception mother, and we also have the birth mother. Where do we have such a case? We have such a case where a pregnant woman converted, right? So she conceived before the conversion, and she gave birth after the conversion. So what do we have? Essentially what we have when you strip down all the conversion, what you have is a woman who conceived when she was not Jewish and gave birth when she was Jewish, right? So Christina was the conception mother, but Chana was the birth mother. She's a different person, a new person with a new name, Hebrew name, everything, right? And she's actually not halachically related to her parents or siblings anymore. Mom is a new person, Christina to Chana. So Christina conceived, but Chana gave birth. So if we can find Talmudic literature which grapples with the struggle of, well, who's the real mother in that case? Bingo, we potentially have our answer. The issue is that we have two sources and they seem to tell us different things. Hence, some great halachic minds emphasize, let's just call it for now, source 1, and explain away source 2 with some technicality. Or they say, no, source number 1 is the main source, source number 2 is the main source, and source number 1 we have to explain away with some technicality. Okay, so let's take a look. So you have source number 1. This is the Gemara in Yevamos, Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis, right? So I have the translation right under. Tashma, come in here. Shnei Achim Tu'umim, 2 twin brothers, Gerim, who converted. Skip for now. And it says, Ein Chayavim Mishum Eishes Ach. Okay, so you have 2 brothers, twin brothers that decided they wanted to go to yeshiva together, not Jewish family, right? And they both convert. So they both get married, and unfortunate events take place, and one of the 2 brothers passes away. Right? There's no prohibition for the one brother to marry the widow of the other brother, no problem, or even in the event of a divorce. The brother's allowed to marry the other brother's wife. Usually that's prohibited because it's your brother's wife. It's one of the arayos, one of the prohibited relationships in the Torah. But the Gemara tells us very accurately, no, he is the new person, not related to his brother. He's allowed to marry that woman that his brother was married to. Fine. That's case number 1, not so pertinent for us. Then the Gemara talks about Harasan, this is B in the translation. Harasan shelo bekedusha v'leidasan bekedusha. If they were conceived, these twin boys, before mom converted, but by the time mom gave birth, she had already went through the conversion. Okay, so then the Gemara says, in that case, the brothers are chayavim mishum eishes ach. They are later in life prohibited to marry the other brother's wife. In other words, they are siblings. Okay, so Christina conceived, Chana gave birth, and these boys are now prohibited to one another's wives. So what does that tell us? That tells us, I think, very clearly that the birth mother is the mother, right? Because if the conception mother was the mother, they don't share a mother because neither of them are related. The mother never gave birth to these kids. Right? That was Christina. Christina, it doesn't exist anymore, so to speak, because by the time she gave birth, it was a different mother. This Gemara, source number 1 implies strongly that the birth mother is the mother. Now, source number 2, without getting to the technicalities, I have a whole thing translated if you want to look into it in more detail. But the Gemara ends up saying that if a woman during pregnancy does a conversion, so part of the conversion process, I'm sure you're aware, is the immersion in the mikvah, the tefillah in the mikvah. So the Gemara tells us that, now listen carefully, this is an important factor, that the immersion of the mother is effective for the baby, for the fetus, to the extent that when the baby is born, the baby does not need to do another immersion in the mikvah. Okay? Now, I said those words carefully because that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that the tefillah, the immersion, works for the baby. Now, if the birth mother was the mother, by the time she gave birth, she was Jewish. So why is the baby considered any different than any other kid born from a Jewish mother? We don't have to understand why the immersion was effective for the child. We just have to say that the child was born to Chana, not Christina. So the kid's Jewish, doesn't need a conversion, not because the tefillah, the immersion worked already in utero, but because since the mom ended up Jewish by the time the birth came along, so that the child is born to Jewish mother, right? That should be fine. So this Gemara, by saying that the tefillah needs to be effective for the child and is, so we're good, but it needs to be effective for the fetus, for the child. So that seems to imply that the egg mother or the mother of conception is the true halachic mother. So here, with this model of understanding the separation, the two mother model of what happens in this case that a mother converts while she is pregnant, we have already two sources which seem to imply different things, whether or not the mother, opposite things about how to define motherhood in halachic thought. Okay, so we'll leave that for now, but we have those two sources. Source number 3 is absolutely fascinating. Source number 3 on page 3. So we have a pasuk which is coming up soon in our parshios, and the 30th parak in Sefer Bereshit. So we're getting up to it soon, which talks about when all the imahos, when Rachel and Leah, the husbands of Yaakov, Bilhah and Zilpah, were all having the 12 shvatim, right? So in the pasuk where Leah gave birth to Dinah, the pasuk is a little funny and doesn't follow the same model as the birth of the other children. And the pasuk tells us, the first line under the English, Va'achar yolda bas, right after Leah gave birth to a daughter, but Tikrash es Shema Dinah, and she named her daughter Dinah. And again, without getting into the technical language of why something is a little off in the pasuk, the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, which is printed in all the Mikros Gedolos, shares the following Aggadic teaching. It tells us that when Leah was pregnant, she was pregnant then with what would be her 7th kid. And she got very nervous. Why? Because she had prophecy and she knew that the two maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah, would each have 2 children, 2 boys of their own, shvatim of their own. So she knows that I already have 6. Leah's talking right now. 6, what? Bilhah plus 2, that's 8. Zilpah plus 2 is 10. If what I'm pregnant now is a boy, so I'm going to be up to 7, and my dear sister Rachel is going to have 1 out of the 12. That's less than the maidservants. I don't want my sister to be less than the maidservants. So she prayed to Hashem to get involved. And she was, in fact, pregnant with the boy, with Yosef. And the Targum tells us, the Midrashic teaching tells us, that God, Hashem, got involved. She took Dinah, who was in Rachel's womb, flipped it over to Leah, and took Dinah, who was in Leah's womb, and flipped it over to Rachel. Can you do that? Even my dad can't do that. Not bad.
It's just the other way.
Wait,
Joseph was
Leah had Yosef in her, and she wanted Rachel to have Yosef because she wanted her to be at least as equal as a maidservant, as Bilhah and Zilpah, to have 2. So she ended up giving birth to Dinah. That's why the pasuk doesn't say that she got impregnated. The other pasukim do. It just says she gave birth to Dinah. because she never got pregnant with Dina, right? That's what the Targumos is coming to explain. So there, what do we see? So now, if I would ask anyone, who is Yosef's mother? What's the answer? Rachel, because that's what we learned in kindergarten, right? And who is Dina's mother? Leah, right? So even though the conception was flipped around, we, as Jewish people in all of history, see Yosef as the birth mother's son and Dina as the birth mother's son. So it's amazing that the halachic authorities bring this up in discussion of surrogacy and egg donation and this mess in Israel. This is one of the sources. Unbelievable thing. Okay, now we can kind of puncture this proof a little bit by taking a look at the Gemara in Brachos Daf Samech, which comes up in the very next source, which says essentially the same thing, right? It's the same teaching, but the way it's phrased deflates the proof a lot. It doesn't say that the fetuses were switched, that Dina and Yosef were switched, but rather it was nehefcha lebas, right? That the genders changed in utero. That was the miracle. So then we don't have a proof anymore, right? So just to show you and this is going to be an emphasis of my Rabbi in Israel, or Basher Weiss, which we'll see, is that every proof has a way to argue the proof. So it's just a very unclear place to really try to come to conclusion, but fine. Source number 4, I'll leave it for now, but you'll take a look later and you can try to figure out which side of the fence it's a proof for. But it's another discussion from a very esoteric, off-topic, seemingly off-topic context, which is used for this, which is applied to these cases. Fine. So those are just a survey of some of the key sources which the halachic authorities turn to try to gain clarity on these matters. So now, to kind of look at the modern day, relatively modern day poskim and how they conclude or try to grapple with these cases. So if you look in source number 5, this is the opinion of Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zatzal, who was obviously one of the great halachic authorities in the past generation. The one disclaimer is that this isn't in his key work, which is called Igros Moshe, which he himself wrote. This is from a different sefer called Mesoras Moshe, which was published based on things that very important people in his orbit and his life heard him say. So it is not as authoritative as having a real teshuva, a response that he himself wrote, but value it definitely does have. And in source number 5, his opinion is that we give the halachic significance to the biological parents. So again, egg donation and surrogacy, our mess in the lab error in Israel would all have different implications when it comes to that. But egg donation, the egg. So again, if in a case of an egg donation, if the donor was not Jewish, even if it was carried to term and given birth to a Jewish mother, according to Moshe Feinstein, this child would need to undergo conversion, right? And that's his opinion. In other words, he sides with the sources that we quoted that support the notion that the biological or the egg mother is the halachic mother. Turning over to page 4, we have the opinion of that's brought down in Yeshurun, one of the great medical halachic journals that are published. So here he's quoting the opinion of Rabbi Eliashiv. Rabbi Eliashiv passed away maybe about 10 years ago. And he was one of the greatest halachic authorities of our time. His opinion carries a heavy weight in the halachic discussion in every single area of halakha. So I just want to read to you the first 4 lines of the teshuva of this article, and then I'll leave the rest up to you on your own. So Maran Harav Shlita, his beer. So this is referring to Rabbi Yashiv. Sheyitziraso shel Adam mishave mizaro shel ha'av v'habeitzim shel ha'isha. The creation of life happens through the egg and the sperm. The harechem shel ha'isha, and the womb of the woman is mitpateach mimeno nolad v'yotz la'avir ha'olam ino kovei esayach. That does not define motherhood in any way. And Maran Harav Shlita, so Rabbi Yashiv continued and he explained himself, shebekol masha nogel liyichus, anything that has to do with identity of a child, yesh liros es harechem, you have to see and perceive the womb, kikli chitzoni, as an external jug, like a vessel, bo hitpatech ha'uber umeno yatsa, that the life develops and comes out from, but that's not the definitive nature of it. and they asked him about the other opinions that hold that no, the birth mother is the mother, and he says it has no bearings in halacha. He was very strong to the side of the genetic mother, the egg mother is the halachic mother. So so we have like Rav Moshe and Rav Elyashiv both agree, but Rav Elyashiv with a certain conviction and confidence more than anyone else. Okay, so this next one is near and dear to my heart because you may or may not know, but I spent a lot of time with Rav Asher Weiss in Israel, the brother of the local Rabbi Weiss. Still speak to him on somewhat of a regular basis, although I'd love it to be more often. And he writes over here in source number 7. And this is at the end of a very long response that he talks about the topic. And he goes through every proof that people bring. And he says, you know, this proof I could answer this way. That proof I could answer that way. And really to come from the sources is hard because sources are equally split and none of them are 100% clear. So he says, Sof Davar, at the end of the day, Ein kol makor lahachriya b'she'ela gadol hazu. There's no true source that we can come to a clear conclusion. Ubal karcheinu tzrichim anu lahachriya b'zeh misvar. Therefore, we have to come to our own conclusion logically. Ukvar yadat masharagal ani lomer shebe'emes doreinu dor yasef. Goes on to explain that our generation is a generation that we don't have the great minds like the Rambam and the Ramban and the Rashba, and we're kind of left to our own minds to try to figure out what to do. And his conclusion based on that is, again, that the birth mother is the one which is biologically connected to the baby. Why? He explains because that's how we define fatherhood. Because we have no other choice, right? Us Shaloah Sani Isha, we do not have the privilege of carrying children. So how do we discern paternity or fatherhood in halacha? It needs to be biologically, right? So the same, he argues, should apply to motherhood. Right, but that's all his own thinking, and he admits that that he agrees with what the great Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who lived 3 minutes from where my parents live now, 5 minutes maybe. So he wrote in his Tuba, and Rav Asher Weiss says, really, he's right that she'elazu tinasin biyadenu rak la'asibabo. That only when Mashiach comes and we have the faculty of prophecy and nevuah, only then will we truly know how to deal with these cases. And therefore, in all the cases, we need to be machmir kishnei hatzadim. We always have to assume that both sides are right and always err on the side of caution. So Rav Asher Weiss would tell us, in a case of split motherhood, surrogacy, or egg donation, if one of the two mothers is not Jewish, so the baby should go through conversion, right? After birth, because we have this huge halachic gray area of how to define motherhood. We'll just peruse over source number 8, but there is a list of poskim halachic authorities that go on the other side that are strong with the birth mother is the mother. And source number 9, I have an excerpt from the article that was published recently in the Times of Israel, October 27th, where the Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Israel, David Lau, said with conviction, with confidence, that the birth mother is the mother. So that is really just a little bit of a perspective of how the great minds grapple with the sources. You have some great minds who favor some sources, other great minds who favor other sources. You have Rav Asher Weiss who says, you know what, the sources are too ambiguous. We can't really consider any of them too heavily. So it comes to them its own logical thinking, and that's how these are dealt with. Now, just one thing to conclude with is the struggle of custody, because. Let's say we assume that it's a major question of, let's say if we assume the birth mother is the mother. Okay, so you have the mother come to court or to Beis Din, Jewish courts or the secular courts in Israel, and says, all the rabbis agree that I'm the mother because I'm the birth mother. And then you have a father knock on the door. I live down the block and the sperm was used for me. I'm the father, so I want custody, right? So that's case number 1, or mother or both parents, biological parents can knock on the door and says, we want our child back. You were the surrogate to our child, and we want to raise him. And the birth parents, the birth couple, if we favor the side that the motherhood is defined in a biological sense, so then she doesn't really have any claim. So what claim is there, and how would we grapple with these things? And the answer is, sorry to disappoint you, that we can't really know. It's going to be a very interesting thing to follow if a custody lawsuit transpires, how this will land. I highly doubt that will have that the halacha will have too much of a weight, as the Times of Israel proudly claim that the last words, that his opinion on the matter does not carry any legal weight. Right? Rabbi Lau's opinion, right? So so it's unclear how the secular courts will debate this, but just one halachic concept kind of from left field, something new, which is pertinent to bring up in source number 9. In Shalos and Shuvas Harajba, he talks about a very sad case where there was a family, 2 little kids. Again, we don't know the whole story, but seemingly young children who were orphaned. And there was different family members that wanted to adopt these children and raise them as their own. Like there was an uncle and an aunt. Neither of them was married. And there's a little boy and a little girl. And the Rajba, in his immense sensitivity, when discussing how to deal with these Yisomim, with these orphans, so the Rajba explains that in his opinion, although he says every child is different, and you have to know that it's so important to have a mother and to have a father. 2 incredibly important energies that a child needs for a healthy balance. But for girls, the energy of a mother is more important, both important. And for boys, the energy of a father figure is more important, right? That's what he says. So he says, let's think about, maybe take the little girl to the aunt, the little boy to the uncle. Think about that. They're going to be living close to each other and we don't want to separate siblings. But then he ends off the last 4 lines, the last word of the line, the 4th last line. He says, you have to be very careful with these things. What the rabbis perceive and think, what's going to be of benefit for the child? How is the child going to have the best upbringing? So in American legal system, there's a concept called parens patriae, which the court cannot decide on a third party to raise the kid in a custody debate of divorce or whatnot, but they have to choose between the 2 sides, if it's joint custody or one side or not side, or one side or the other side. So it seems to me, I mean, from a halachic perspective, it's baffling, but it seems to me that it's almost like a custody battle where both couples have quite a legitimate claim to raise the child. Now, if the custody battle starts right away, so then the whole concept of Tovas Hayeled, what's best for this little beautiful little girl born in Israel 2 weeks ago, is not really such a factor because the baby's a baby, and the baby's going to remember whoever she grows up with. But let's say it takes a year to identify the genetic biological parents, and obviously court litigation takes a long time. And probably the court system is going to allow the birth parents to continue raising the child until the clarity comes to be. And by the time the court finishes the case, the kid's probably going to be, this girl's probably going to be a toddler. So there, I could see, if given to halachic minds to decide, that there the concept of Tovas Hayeled, which is spoken about in the Rajba and other poskim as well, that if this child already grew up and knows mommy, knows Ima, knows Abba, and grows up with those parents, so then I think there would be a strong case in this modern day Mishpat Shlomo, in this modern day King Solomon case where there's 2 couples claiming the child to be theirs, that once the child already experienced 3 years in these parents' homes, I think because it's such a gray area, that would be at least part of the weight that's given to this case. So again, to finish in the same way that we started, this case is talking about real people and real suffering and real doubt. And we spoke about it on an academic level, but in no ways did we want to dehumanize the case. And ultimately, our tefillos for this little girl and the families is that they should have, that she should grow up in a loving, nurturing home with parents that love her and no other parents are claiming her to be theirs.
Amen.